Bunch of low budget shit, Mr. Wins. None of it's gonna stay in the public eye, Mr. Wins. You wanna reach for the stars, Mr. Wins. Fast forward to 2020, Mr. Wins. We got A24, Mr. Wins. Sign with them, Mr. Wins.
Time for your big break, Mr. West.
Well, this is simultaneously gonna be the most tone-deaf and most interesting ranking video I've done so far. Unlike the previous people and franchises I've talked about where I knew who they were beforehand and would slowly discover their work on my own time and learn to appreciate them, I legit have not heard of this man until 2022 when X and Pearl made waves in the online film culture. So fast forward to when we heard about the early screenings of this movie but still didn't know its release date, and then randomly I was like, fuck it. Let's check out this man's movies before he decides to drop the release date randomly in March. Oh, would you look at that? So after watching this dude's movies, I must give him a big round of ands. I mean, the no budget aspect is commendable, but here are your ands. There were some decent ideas sprinkled throughout, but I don't know, man. The execution of his earlier movies just did not gel with me. But with that said, I kind of have quite a bit to say about his work before his breakout trilogy. So funnily enough, I advise that y'all are more attentive with what I have to say about these bottom 7 movies before we get to the X trilogy. So with that being said, let me hop right into this. I literally forgot that I saw this damn movie, so we're already off to an oof start. I really don't want to be that guy that shits on no budget movies, but damn, they were really working with no budget here. This is most certainly a debut, as the shots are managed poorly, the dialogue's very generic, and the actors here are giving little to no effort with their performances. But you want to know my biggest problem with the movie? It's the sound editing. And you want to know why? Let me just show you.
Don't do that!
What?
Just a big fat why. The only thing that saves this movie are the old-timey old film scenes, as that's the only time that the no-budget quality actually helps out the movie. Look, I understand that sometimes when you have that natural hunger to want to create something immediately, you use whatever tools you have at your disposal, even if it's nothing. However, I think this was a case where if you didn't have the materials to realize your vision, then maybe it was best to hold off on it. Now obviously, who cares what I have to say about it, because hey, look how far he's come since then. So let me just say this. If I was Ti West, I would revoke this movie's status as a directorial debut and just label it as some lost college movie. Let me just drop a question for y'all real quick. What piece of media left you with the feeling of just utmost boredom? As for me, I'm not gonna say this tops the list, but it might in the future. This is one of those slow burn type horror movies, and it lives up to its name, just in the worst way possible, by being utterly boring and being a traitor to my time. It gives us a relatively competent enough story, 2 employees wanting to capture the hauntings that supposedly happen in their motel, which puts them on the cycle of the 2 taking turns doing their own investigating, finding some minute odd shit, reporting their findings to each other, wash, rinse, repeat until we get to the climax. And to be frank, I was decently invested at first, but then with each search cycle, I slowly started to get irked by this repetitive process more and more that after witnessing how shit goes down in the final act, I look back at the movie as a whole and felt the fattest sense of betrayal from it. See, when I'm watching a slow burn horror movie, I want little details being dropped, little incidents occurring throughout the story that build upon each other so that we get a big, climactic, and satisfying final act. What I got from this movie was just meandering, sluggish search shenanigans that left the final act and the movie as a whole feeling half-baked. Well, this is certainly some guerrilla filmmaking right here. Okay, so maybe Ti West's budget didn't improve a ton in his second movie, but at least there's a simple momentum behind it. With it just being a simple manhunt on some hunter broskies in the woods, the movie chugs along at a surprisingly alright pace. I say surprisingly alright because I'd imagine that the guerrilla filmmaking will distract and put off a lot of people. That's without mentioning the audio quality. And don't worry, I'm not gonna defend the guerrilla filmmaking here. It very much gets a not good rating. But I will say that it was, at the very least, an interesting thing to experience. And yeah, that's kind of all I have to say about this movie. It's a mediocre amateur movie, but at least it didn't bore me out of my mind like The Roots did, and it didn't betray my time like The Innkeepers did. So kudos to not being dead last, movie. I'm never checking you out again. Ah, these movies. I did watch the first movie before checking out the sequel, and yeah, I'ma stop with this movie because I really just didn't give a shit about either of them. I guess my thing against these movies is that the cabin fever, the disease itself, is just so broken that it's like, what's even the point of sitting through these movies if everyone's just gonna die from it? I mean, I guess it reminds people of good hygiene, but eh. Anyways, as for this movie, I rate it the same as the first one, but I kind of cared for it more. Just barely, though. To give the movie some props, the cabin fever pops up a good deal. There's a big moment near the beginning, then it's sprinkled amongst some random individuals throughout the middle portion of the movie, until we get the last 30 minutes of the movie, where the cabin fever is finally let loose and wreaks havoc on a school. So yeah, unfortunately, we're stuck watching a teen dramedy movie for most of the movie, and while it's not a good teen dramedy, it wasn't the worst thing ever. Sure, the MC's friend is that try-hard type of character that's chasing after girls in the most embarrassing ways possible, but the MC himself's okay, he's serviceable enough. His interactions with his crush were definitely charming enough. Plus, when they do have a vulnerable moment near the end of the movie, it's pretty decent. Again, the whole teen dramedy aspect is not done good, but it's competent enough. As for the cabin fever shenanigans, I guess I was able to care about it more here, as not only did the students and faculty have to worry about the cabin fever itself, but also watch out for the government forces that were out to execute the infected. But yeah, I guess I kind of cared for this more than its predecessor. Not because it's better, but because it was an adequately entertaining time. Still pretty mid though. This one was a decent watch, but alas, it has a pretty fat con holding it back for me. But let's start off on a good note. This movie's another slow burn type horror movie, but thankfully it was more engaging than Innkeepers. I guess that's mainly due to having a decent MC and a premise that, while yes, it is literally revealed in the fucking title, it takes its time revealing actually important clues minutes by minutes that pay off pretty well in the final act, meaning it didn't waste my time. But wait, wasn't there a fat con I mentioned earlier? Yes, there is, lads, and the fat con that I have against the movie is the flow of its scenes. See, this one's got a bit of a bipolar nature to it, having some very mundane scenes at one moment, then conchowing you with some insane scenes the next. Now, bipolar media can be great, if executed well. And when it comes to this movie, its two kinds of scenes work pretty well. From just seeing our MC dance the night away, to the offing of her bestie, these two kinds of scenes are great on their own. But, in my opinion, I feel like the connective tissue between these scenes is pretty weak. Now look, I get that most horror movies have a bit of trouble balancing the mundane and the terror, but it feels like this movie really suffers from this issue, as it leaves these scenes not feeling ever flowing, but feeling like beefy fish slaps. But anyways, again, a solid attempt, but you could have glued this together a bit better. It's pretty anticlimactic that the odd movie out of Ty West filmography ends up being right in the middle of the ranking, but hey, that's how it turned out for me. And now I'm left with a double standard saltiness of not liking his non-horror movie more. But alas, this movie's greatest fault lies in what genre it is. It's a Western. Okay, to be perfectly blunt with y'all, I don't give a shit about Western movies. There are of course some exceptions like Sergio Leone's Dollar Trilogy, The Hateful Eight. I swear there are more. But unless if it's allowed to mesh with another genre, sci-fi anyone, they usually end up being a slog for me to get through. But hey, this one kind of did more for me by giving itself one considerable plot tweak. What if we did John Wick in the Wild West? Now hold your horses, fellas. Don't expect everything great about John Wick to appear in this movie. All I mean is that its basic premise is literally just Ethan Hawke getting revenge after older Eddie killed his dog. That's all the comparison. Wait, Ethan Hawke? Older Eddie actor James Ranson? Who else is here? Taissa Farmiga? Karen Gillan? John Travolta? Where the hell did you get the money to hire these guys? Or did the entire movie budget go towards hiring these guys? Did they do this for free? So yeah, this is probably the most stacked cast that West has worked with pre-X trilogy. But yeah, unfortunately, the Western genre confines the actors and story to deliver just okay results. Yeah, sorry for dragging the Western name through the mud, but hey, hopefully y'all can get a better kick out of this movie than I did, as I just found it okay. I was kind of digging this one. It was solid. The gist behind this one is that it's supposedly the only found footage of this shelter community that was hiding some nefarious shit, leading to the movie having a found footage style to it, and in all honesty, it's not that bad. Now sure, it's not that smooth in certain scenes, and I kind of wish that we got different shots whenever it was just our protagonists talking to each other, but the found footage style does help you immerse into the uneasiness that this community has. Now sure, there isn't much originality going on with most of the movie. You hear the phrase eerie community, and you could probably guess all the hidden clues, the build-up, the reveals, and the thriller shenanigans that play out. So why did I find this to be a decent watch? Gene Jones. When looking at the movies prior to the X trilogy, Gene Jones gave the best performance of any Ti West movie. He's got an underlying command and relaxed but sinister nature that pulls you in whenever he speaks. Probably the best example of this is in the interview where he's both going along with the questions the MC lays on him while also lying down the authority he has over the MCs and his people. Basically what I'm saying is that whenever Gene Jones is on screen, it's a shot of class for the movie. So yeah, overall, after checking damn near half of this man's stuff and feeling underwhelmed with it, this was a decent little treat. Alright, trilogy time, bitches. So as for the first movie in this trilogy, there's actually not much to say about it. Take Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but replace the big bad butcher with some old rednecks, and replace the mission of visiting a homestead with the mission of filming a porno, and that's basically this movie. Now granted, it doesn't meet the heights of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but it's still a good time in my books. I'll admit though, it does take a bit for this movie to really rev up. I mean sure, we got Mia being Mia, and Cuddy feeling the love as he's but overall, the first half of the movie is pretty slow and it ain't nothing to write home about. But luckily, the movie picks up in the second half and Ti's horror isms get to shine as aside from some good gore, he writes in a, let's say, funky little secret that our old rednecks are hiding that, as a filthy fuck myself, I found it pretty kinky, pretty funny, and somewhat submersive on Ti's part that helps make the final act pretty great. So yeah, there's not much else to say about this one. It's got that... Okay, since I've already used this description in some past videos, how about I officially coin it that double S double TP DNA? That short, simple, to the point DNA. One of the best prequels in cinematic history. I'm not even joking. Now, even though the #1 spot is obviously the culmination of Ti West's work as a director, I believe that this movie is the culmination of Ti West's specific style of horror. He's able to walk the line of the mundane and of the insanity that this movie has without it feeling disjointed. We can go from Mia just feeding the farm animals, then taking care of her pops, then cut to her making sweet love to a dummy, and it oddly manages to still feel like a natural flow of events. Why is that? Well, because now there is a singular soul that we must feel for, that being Pearl, a little farm girl that wants to reach for a bigger and brighter future. Sure, it's a generic character background, but that's what makes the insanity element such a clever inclusion to this cliched background. It helps create a more effective pull for the audience to get invested in Pearl's journey to reach for stardom. But, unfortunately, this story don't end too pretty, as once you see just how low Pearl has stooped to by the end of this movie, and remember the fate that awaits her next, it makes that ending shot one of the most cathartically depressing shots you'll ever see, while crowning Mia as our new psychotic queen. So again, not much else to say. It's quite an effective horror tragedy that Ti West cooked up. So let's now get to the culmination of the X trilogy. Yeah, I'ma be honest with y'all. Even though I decided to do this ranking out of the blue, Once I was halfway through this man's movies, I thought to myself, yeah, his new movie is gonna be his best by far, ain't it? And fast forward to having seen it on opening weekend, and whoa, look at that, I'm a fucking psychic. Ty West lands this trilogy on its best foot by crafting a horror movie that, while not perfect, is one that everyone can get a kick out of. So first off, absolutely beautiful pace. Whereas the other two entries had their own minor pacing issues, this one had a snappy momentum to it and absolutely flew by for me. Second, the homages to the giallo genre are beautiful. With sharp colors, good editing, and good practical gore, Ty West is able to deliver these kills in provocative and kind of humorous ways. I know a lot of people are torn on 80s representation in our modern day media, but I really enjoyed how this movie shunned the light on the more lustful and dirty side of the 80s Hollywood landscape. And of course, with a murder mystery which leads to an ending that's a perfect full circle culmination for the trilogy and Maxine's character, this movie pops off on a lot of cylinders. But there are a handful of faulty cylinders in this flick. This movie pays homages to two subgenres, giallo and film noir. And while I absolutely loved the giallo homages, the noir homages honestly felt a bit rushed. Yeah, while I enjoyed the murder mystery itself, I feel like the journey ended up cutting a couple of storytelling corners just to get to its third act. There's a good deal of Hollywood subtext in this movie, and it can start to feel a bit much after a certain point. It's like, we get it, Hollywood's crooked. Let's move along. And I feel like a good chunk of the side characters here were either cut too soon or should have had more to do, especially the cop duo. But at the end of the day, I can safely call this Ty West's magnum opus as a director and my personal favorite movie from him. So yeah, that was a decent little challenge I gave myself. Just binging through a filmography that I was pretty much clueless of beforehand. Maybe I'll do this every year, though that's entirely dependent on the space in my schedule. So Ty West, let's just hope that this trilogy is a sign of a more fruitful future, as everything outside of this trilogy didn't leave much of an impact on me. But I'm always gonna have respect for independent filmmakers, and hey, with how much recognition he's gained in the cinema culture thanks to this trilogy, maybe studios will start turning his way to direct some new horror flicks. So all things considered, you're having a decent run, Mr. West. But anyways, make sure to come back to this video once you've scoured the internet and watched all his movies to tell me how wrongly I rated his movies in the comments below. Deal?